that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. It can be so easy to overlook building a brand and raising brand awareness because, well, companies have to win the current quarter. There's always this push for short-term revenue, and that can make us overlook and skip over the brand building process. But what role does brand awareness have in winning all the quarters and the long-term revenue growth of a business? How does it actually impact sales? To discuss that topic, I'm joined by Allyson Havener, SVP of Marketing and Community at TrustRadius, a software platform that helps buyers make informed decisions. Welcome to the show, Allyson.
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for having me.
So glad you're here today. This is such an important topic. There's always this sort of like, maybe we could build brand later mindset that companies have. And it's a topic near and dear to my heart. I'm really excited to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it in your intro with, people look at short-term and long-term constantly when they're thinking about, planning. But marketers, we are constantly fighting for budget and a seat at the table. And it's really hard to do that when you don't have a lot of numbers to kind of back you up. And so brand awareness, building that brand preference and trust is a little bit more on the emotional side. And it's hard for us to, justify when it comes to some of those meetings.
For sure. And we are going to get deep into that today. But let's start with the basics. How do you explain the importance of brand awareness to non-believers?
So when I think about brand awareness and non-believers, I don't think there actually are non-believers out there. I think if you tell people, I was just talking actually with one of my friends who is a CEO. They're starting up, and he was like, he wants to make his first marketing hire, and he's like, what should I, be really thinking about? And I was like, well, you want someone that's really thinking about kind of that full funnel experience, because he's like, I want someone that is completely demand gen focused. Like that's what they have. Their heart and soul is demand gen. I'm like, yeah, well, you can't really drive demand if nobody knows who you are and nobody's willing to, open up the door when you come knocking. And that means that doesn't mean just from like your sales and your BDRs, but like, when you want to reach out to somebody, like if you really want to think about scale and longevity, brand is really important, because do you open the door? Do you answer the phone call? Do you answer that email of a brand that you have no idea who you are and have no idea what they do? It's like very like, it's simple. And so I think most people are like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I don't think there's a lot of non-believers in the sense that like, when you put it in the most like basic terms like that, they're like, yeah, okay, of course we need that. But I think where you have to have the hard conversations, and trust me, I think every marketer is doing this. I'm even constantly doing this with leadership, with the board, is thinking about brand as this kind of reputation management, and you're really addressing kind of the emotional side of your buyer, and really trying to come to them as, hey, like we know that there's a pain point out there. We know that we can bring value, and here's how we've done it for people that are like you, at companies that are like you, etc. So I think it's, if you can really connect the dots for people to understand, hey, when we have a really strong, trusted brand and people understand us, we have customer advocates being out there and really talk or sharing our message and showing the value that we bring, like that's going to make everything easier for us. That's going to make our sales team's job a lot easier. That's going to make our CSM's jobs easier when they need to go for that renewal. That makes everything that we do more effective. So I think when you start to think about like when people are actually not non-believers, but they actually need to kind of see that full circle of what brand can really do for them.
I think that's such an interesting point. And actually, like, even just your description of your friend who says we need somebody with a demand gen focus, it's almost just a different definition of demand gen than what maybe it actually is. Like, we've talked on the show before about what's the difference between lead generation and demand generation. And brand is such a huge part of demand gen, right? Like you said, having awareness and trust makes bringing in leads easier. And that's exactly what demand generation is. It's building demand, not just generating leads. So when somebody says, we need somebody with a demand gen focus, they're thinking leads, but what they're saying is brand as well. So it's not like you said, it's not that they're a non-believer. They just don't even know what they're saying, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's more exactly like it's an educational um gap probably that we have with a lot of CEOs or people that have been more in the traditional sense of like, hey, like this is the way marketers are kind of organized and departments are organized. But I see us really as you think about for all those marketing leaders out there thinking about how they're going to grow their departments. And I think the more we can get away from those silos and still obviously have swim lanes, but I think the more we can get away from like, hey, customer marketing sits over here, product marketing sits under here, but more about how we each have ownership over kind of this full funnel journey and the way buyers are going to be interacting with our brand. And then how do we really connect that in an integrated way? Like on my team, I don't even have a demand gen role per se. I have integrated marketing because there's somebody at the top that's thinking about that full funnel journey from that first brand touch all the way to that post sale when we turn them into an advocate to when they go to a different company and rebuy TrustRadius. And then all the inputs that go into that. You still need somebody that's a product expert, that's building messaging, that's building persona, that feed those campaigns. You still need a content person. You still need those customers to have a voice in all of those campaigns. But I think if people kind of reorient themselves to think about not marketing, not sitting in these silos, but thinking about this integrated approach to meet buyers essentially where they are, but also have a very joint experience for them, a jointed experience for them. And it's a mindset shift, not only for your marketing team, but everyone that works with you cross-functionally. And when you talk to the CEO and you talk to the board and you're in that room, like it's a conversation, and it's just I will say it's a journey. You're on your own journey as a marketer as well. It doesn't happen overnight. And it really does though change the mentality of your whole go-to-market team if you think about it, of like taking away these silos and just really thinking about how can you make this really integrated experience for your buyer and for ultimately your customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great way to approach it. This sort of everyone's different roles across the customer journey. I love how you said swim lanes, but not silos. I think that's so important. And maybe could you talk a little bit more about the very basic the definition or difference between that integrated marketing role that you described versus like a demand gen role? Like why have the one versus the other?
So when I think about a demand gen role, and I'm talking about it in the most classical sense,
Yeah.
I think most of them are, to your point earlier around lead gen, they're really focused about that capture of demand. How are we getting people into our marketable universe? How are we getting them to that demo? How are we enabling our BDRs? And that's super, super important. Like those types of people that are thinking about the bottom of the funnel like that. And when I think about integrated marketing, that's just one component. And so when I think about integrated marketing, they're thinking about, okay, all the way from that bottom funnel product message that we, worked with the product marketer on, how are we going to get people to care? Because how many emails have you gotten or calls that you've gotten and they instantly start talking about your product? I think every marketer knows out there that that is like the biggest no now. It's like, no, nobody cares about your product. I care about my problem and hitting my revenue targets. That's what I care about. And so you have to back it all the way up into like what's going on in the industry that you can align yourself to, that are problems, and that you can align your brand to, that ultimately get, when you actually start talking about your product, someone cares. And I think this is even more so, like, even if you're in an established category, this is super important, like in a technology category, because it's really important that you have a POV out there. You have a reason for people to kind of like tune in and want to listen to you, because otherwise, like, it's really hard to make some noise um and to kind of establish yourself as a thought leader, especially in crowded markets. And then it's even more so important if you're trying to create a category, a technology category. You hear a lot about that out there, about different kind of go to market tactics. If you're going to try to create your own category and be the leader within that category, you have to really have a strong thought leadership, um, like arm and or I don't even say department, but like a content strategy, that you're tying yourselves to these macro problems that this persona is constantly thinking about. It's what keeps them up at night. Have a POV and start establishing that trust and establishing that authority in the space. So then when you do have some of more of those like mid funnel, like educational type content, they're like, oh, okay, they actually know what they're talking about. They actually have like a POV on what's going on out there. They'll be more likely to listen. And then when you have that more bottom funnel content that's like, hey, by the way, if you need support in this, like our product can help support you in tackling these challenges, etc. So integrated marketers thinking about that entire kind of almost like storyline and content strategy. So when you think about the capture at the bottom, that lead gen, that BDR reaching out, the outbounding from your sales team, like those things are only going to become more and more efficient. So that's kind of the difference, is where I think that like demand gen, kind of like that bottom capture classic in the most classical sense. But I think integrated marketing is thinking about all of that kind of that storytelling across the funnel, and the content strategy and the distribution strategy of that content.
Yeah, for sure. It's really that full funnel person
Mhm.
that's kind of looking at the all the different conversion points, not just the bottom conversion, which is where a
Yeah.
lot of people like to start. We like to start with the bottom of the funnel when we haven't put anybody in the top of the funnel yet. But no one to convert at the bottom of the funnel if you're not thinking about putting people in the top to start. Um,
Well, and you hear a lot too, and you read a lot of this on like kind of from thought leaders on LinkedIn about like the next thing, it's like outbounding's dead. Oh, this type of content's dead, like gated content's dead. And it's like, honestly, let's back up and just think about what really resonates with our buyers, and like how are they consuming content? What kind of content do they want to consume? And how am I showing up in those, essentially those channels? I don't think anything's necessarily like dead per se. I think it's more about how is your how is your buyer interacting with your brand and what you're putting out in market, regardless if that's a sales email or that's a webinar or that's a podcast or ad creative, whatever it is. We do, obviously, at TrustRadius, we think about the millions of buyers that are coming to TrustRadius to do research, and ultimately make a technology decision. We're always surveying them to understand, like, get a pulse check, you know, how, like, one, what makes it, like, what irks you the most when it comes to buying new technology? And the number one thing was sellers reaching out when they're not even in market or have no idea what they're talking about. The and so like if you think about that, you're like, well, okay, so let's talk about like this. How are we showing up in market? So we are more relevant, and we also, like, in our sellers aren't reaching out to buyers that are not in market and have and wasting everybody's time. Um, and so, and the other thing is like people want to talk to their peers. And so we see the thing that makes buyers most likely to buy are two things. One is being able to just self-serve as much product information as possible. So that means they want like interactive demos that they can manage without talking to a salesperson. They want pricing. They want customer reviews. They want to get as much hands-on free trials, hands-on product information that they can self-serve without talking to a salesperson. And the second thing is that they just want to talk to their peers. Who's someone that's like me at a company like mine that's using this technology? How did it go? And that sounds really simplistic, but if you actually think about the way consumers are in the B2C world, it's the exact same thing. We want to get as much product information. We look at reviews. We talk to our peers, and and we make a decision. And so that's transcending into B2B and becoming very, very prominent. So how do we build a go-to-market around that essentially helps all the rest of our efforts, our go-to-market efforts and outreach more effective? And I think that's again going back to like this mind shift that we need to have as go-to-market teams.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to talk more about that. I think it's really interesting, like you're talking about first understanding what your customer base wants and then figuring out how to give them what they want as opposed to force them down a path that they don't want to go on. So first, even that mindset of wanting to understand customer desire and how they want to buy is super important. And then actually creating a path that they can follow that's going to, not make them uncomfortable, right? Give them everything that they need to make their decisions until they're ready to have their conversation with you. And so I think that's super important, that just customer centric mindset. And I think there's more to that too. I want to understand from you, like, what do you think are the like kind of early first steps, the immediate steps to focus on brand awareness in B2B? And then what about some of the, ongoing strategies that you want to put in place?
When I think about brand strategy, I would also look at where it's not just brand awareness. Like, do people like it? There is like we make decisions based on this, like, right, the recognition. Like, we look at it, we know what it is. Okay, great. And then the second piece is that, like, kind of what I'm talking about, that like peer, like social proof that you need. That's going to be that the driver that means that you actually make the short list. And so buyers are actually, when we did our last survey for our last big buyer behavior report that we do every year, it's called the B2B buying disconnect. What you see is that shortlists are actually shrinking. And that's because people, the three main resources that they use is either getting their hands on some like product demo or anything that's like some kind of interactive demo, again, that's not led by a salesperson. They're relying on their own prior experience and customer reviews. Those are the top three resources that people are using to essentially make their shortlist, make a decision. Okay, so if you think about that, you're like, all right, when I think about my brand strategy, where do I feel like I'm missing, where am I missing? And I think that for TrustRadius and our marketing strategy, we have some really big competitors out there that have really defined our category. And so a big part of our brand awareness is that everything is about content consumption. We make a ton of thought leadership content. We make every piece of content, we try to make it digestible. We put it in different formats, but everything is made for mass consumption. And that's part of our strategy. So when we think about demand capture and having a lot of like those mechanisms, we really rely on our inbound. And I don't think this is anything like new, but what we had to do is do a lot of convincing at the beginning because it's the long game. And we're like, hey, we know that like we're gonna see a lull in our pipeline that's coming from inbound, that is coming from our BDRs. We know that we're gonna see a lull kind of like in some of our lead gen efforts. but it's setting those expectations up front, and we're like, great, but you know what we're really going to invest in? We're going to do a bunch of speaking engagements. We're going to do a ton of reports. All of them are going to be ungated. We're going to build them on our blog for SEO purposes. We're going to go for like a digital PR strategy. We're just trying to get as much content out there as possible. And we're going to see this lull, but what we think is going to happen is that people were, and it takes time. This takes a lot of time. So again, you have to set those expectations. But what we will see is more qualified people coming in. We're going to see more people when they do come to us, they actually know TrustRadius. They know some of our differentiators. They see us as a trusted brand. And those people are not only going to come in, but those are people are going to inbound, but we're going to be able to sell to them much faster. They're going to be happier customers in the long run, and that's going to lead to better retention, better expansion numbers, etc. And so I think when you kind of look at your brand, it really is a revenue driver, and it can help in so many ways. Again, kind of going back to the buyer expectations, and I've given this example before, but I just love it because it's like we looked at our sales process and we were like, wow, we see this big drop at proposal. I'm like, what's happening at proposal? I'm like, oh, that's the first time that they're ever seeing pricing. Great. Let's put BDRs, you're sending out pricing before they ever get to the meeting. And sure, we saw a drop off in meetings, but we actually, that proposal, that conversion rate went so far that like now it like evened out with everything else. We see it also an acceleration. And so we're getting people that sure, there's still value selling that needs to be done, but they have an idea of like the price range. And that just gives buyers again that information that they want. They're like, great, okay, now I'm ready to learn more. I feel like this is a big trust signal that they're willing to share pricing with me. And it's just been a huge needle mover for us. And also our AEs and BDRs are not wasting time on people that are going to be like sticker shocked at, 2 months into a sales cycle.
Mhm.
So I think there's things that like, again, but that's still all part of the brand. And I think you also have to remember your brand, the way your buyers are having those interactions with you, the way your customers, that customer experience is also part of your brand. Because you see if prior experience is a top resource by buyers, when they go to another company and they had a really good experience with you, guess who they're taking with you? Or with them, excuse me. They're taking you. They want to rebuy you. Like they probably got that promotion in that next job because of you. If you give them like a really good customer experience and make sure that they're super successful.
Yeah, for sure. We've got to get our hands on that B2B buyer disconnect report. So, Allyson, you'll have to send it to us and we'll get it in the show notes so everybody listening can take a look at that report. I know it sounds like some really great data in there, but I love, yeah, I mean, your description of sort of like moving pricing before a meeting and then having fewer meetings, but a higher win rate. I mean, it's all math, right? Like you can maybe afford to have a dip in one part of the funnel and an increase if it means an increase in another part of the funnel. If it all comes out better in the end, right, then being more strict about what qualifies as a qualified lead, or who gets to have a meeting. Does everybody get to have a meeting, even that aren't qualified? That, like you said, your sales team's now way more efficient, and they're not wasting time with people that don't have a certain budget. And all of that's going to be unique to any business out there, right? Like nobody listening out there, don't just take exactly this formula and cut and paste it, but understanding the math of your funnel could help to identify those opportunities to give a little bit more information up front, narrow down the field a little bit, and really make sure your bottom of funnel is more efficient. And maybe that's what it's about in some ways, is making some like having that focus on the top of funnel to ensure that your bottom of funnel isn't just a mass of Google search ads driving any conversion through with unqualified people.
Yeah. And I think people like, I don't think anything I'm really saying is like no marketer listening to this is like, oh yeah, like this all like when you think about it from just like a logical standpoint, you're like, yeah, like this makes a ton of sense. I think the hardest thing is the change management because we've gotten so good at as marketers justifying our spend, justifying our headcount and everything that we're doing because it's because we wanted to make it a perfect science and it's not. And I think that is really where it comes down to is that the more you try to get away from like this being a very linear um uh way to measure things like okay this person converted on this ad, they came into our database, they had this many touches, then they were in MQL and this is how the MQLs are converting and like it goes on and on. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's KPIs to make sure that people, again, like if my big strategy is that I want people consuming all of our content as much as possible and interacting with as many campaigns as possible, yeah, I need to have a pulse on that. Now, does that mean that that is going to be like we spoke at this event? That means that that's going to be everybody that saw me speak at this event, that's going to be revenue down the line. No, that's not like that. It's not this kind of input output system. It's an orchestration of representing your brand out into the market that people want to align themselves to and align their careers with, essentially. And so the hardest thing is going to be the change management internally to justify those programs while you still need to hit revenue goals. And I think that's what everybody struggles with. And I don't even have a perfect formula for that. But what I try to do in my own marketing is like, hey, here's these KPIs that I think that are make here's our strategy. Here's how I'm measuring that in terms of certain KPIs that we're looking kind of across the funnel and how things are converting, even pulling out campaigns. I'm like, here's kind of how this campaign performed. And data is only as good as the story that you can tell from it. So I think when you bring people along in that journey and you're like, hey, like this is how I'm assessing uh how we're executing on this strategy that's ultimately driving revenue for this company, and you have that data and those anecdotes that help you tell that story, that's really where I think the most difficult piece is. Because marketers are super creative, or we can be super operational and we can get a ton of stuff done and pump a lot out into the market. But I think where we really, really struggle is everybody wants to be like, okay, if I give, especially CFOs, right? If I give marketing another $1 million, like what am I going to get out of it? And
Mm-hmm.
that's really not the right question, right? I think it's like, do you want to invest $1 million more in marketing? And here's what we can do with that to ultimately improve the bottom line of the business. It's not like a one for one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, that's the most critical piece of all this, right? Especially as you're talking about setting expectations internally. There might be some dips in these areas and creating this change management to get people that are not marketers to think about marketing as not a one-to-one. You put in $1, you get out three, right? We can't look at it exactly that way. So talk to me a little more about some of the KPIs and those success metrics. Like I'm mostly thinking about like the KPIs that are important to the marketing department are probably very different from the KPIs and the story that you're telling to other execs at other areas of the business. So, how do you think about setting those kind of shared goals and metrics that people will care about, and also keep track of all the marketing KPIs that help us do our job better?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things when there's like the pulse check on the channel, right? So as a marketer, you're constantly looking like, okay, my email channel, like what are those open rates? What are my bounce rates? Like how do I know something's healthy? When I'm looking at my social, like how, like the content that I'm putting out there, how is that performing? What are the impressions on it, et cetera? And then also looking at, like, obviously a lot of there's so much industry benchmark data out there, but I think in the most simplistic sense, the way I think about it is there's channel pulse check KPIs that, like, hey, like, some if our open rate is below 15%, or whatever the benchmark is that you're looking at for your industry and your persona and all of that, like, there's a problem. Like, what, like, we need to go in and figure that out. And so I think that, so there's like the performance like that, and like, and most executives, some executives care about those types of things, but really that's for the marketing team to make sure at the end of the day, like, campaigns can actually perform properly. If you have really high bounce rates and you have really bad data hygiene, like, you're going to have a really hard time building that email marketing channel. If your creative isn't performing and you're not building audiences properly, or you haven't really clear or um, started thinking about, like, your offering in that ad creative and your paid media, your right, what keywords for search, etc. Like, if you're not doing these pulse checks, like, none of those channels are going to be really that efficient. I think when you're talking to it's like that double click down into, like, okay, here's how you can give. I have like this little dashboard. I look at, like, variances between some of our channel performance, how, website, and then I start getting into, like, hey, if I know all of this kind of top of funnel KPIs are healthy, then we should start to see that when you start looking at kind of more classic where the conversions are happening, these should be healthy as well, right? Or if we're like, hey, we have great top of funnel metrics, why are we not seeing this on the conversion side? Like, what do we need to go in and, like, optimize? And so I always think about it in terms of two things. One is pulling data to make a decision, right? I'm looking at my email performance and I'm like, oh my God, like, what is going on? Like, we need to make some decisions here and make some changes, or pulling data to be able to understand if you ultimately need to do some of that discovery work. And like, web page conversion is a really good example of this because it's really easy to see. Look at all this traffic. We just ran this campaign. We're like, wow, we drove so much traffic and our conversion rate, like, plummeted. And I'm like, why? And I was like, oh, because we never had really driven traffic to this page. But
Mm.
all the traffic that had been going to that page before was, they were literally finding that through organic search. So obviously that's going to be higher converting. So when we're sending paid traffic there, obviously the conversion rate's going to drop. Okay. Like, we're okay with that because, like, you understand that those are, like, you can do that analysis. But I think when you're pulling data, it's like making that decision, doing that pulse check, and then also reporting out, so you're building confidence with all of your stakeholders that, hey, like, marketing, what we're producing out and what we're putting out in market is performing well. Here's where it's not. Here's where we're fixing it. And so it builds confidence with all your stakeholders as well, if you can also use the data to tell a story of, like, how you're managing your
Mm.
department.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think connecting the dots for people between why we're looking at these data points and what that's going to mean for bottom of funnel. Maybe it hasn't reached the bottom of funnel yet. We still, we know because we pay attention to data that people spend this amount of months in this stage. And so this is where they're sitting right now. But if things continue to perform as they always have, then, I think sort of painting that picture of, like, this is it. It might be a long-term strategy and it's not impacting revenue now, but these are the leading indicators that drive you to those revenue figures, because the CFO isn't going to care about your email open rate.
Hmm.
Marketing is going to care a lot about your email open rate. So really connecting the dots for people who aren't in the weeds in marketing to what their end goal is, and drawing that connection for them will buy you that trust, like you're talking about, to
Mhm.
be able to invest in brand.
Yeah, it's an anecdote. Honestly, I think it's really anecdotal too, like around like kind of those stories. Um, you wouldn't believe we were going through some of our like Q2 reporting, and I like love when my team like just sprinkle in some anecdotes. And you'd be surprised when you hear like our sales team, they're using those anecdotes on a call. There you hear our CEO use it out at all hands. And it's great because you're like, that's what really sticks with people is like these like stories, and especially when it's from your customer. And so great, you can have all of these amazing data points, but what really sticks with people at the end of the day are these, again, going back to brand and this emotional connection, are like these stories of success and driving success for your customers and weaving that in. We were telling a story about our BDR who really took this campaign and he just like ran with it. And he was just crushing it when it came to booking meetings. A lot of those meetings were converting into pipeline. And we talked about a few of those cases and really how he partnered with the AEs. And that really resonated with people. And they're like, and then that resonates with all the other AEs that maybe, if you're having a hard time with that kind of marketing and sales alignment, those types of stories where it's like, hey, somebody picked up what marketing was putting down and they ran with it, and look all this success that they had. And then they're like, oh yeah, they don't need to see all these numbers and all these success. They just needed to hear like a few success stories. And now they're going to be way more tuned in. And again, to your point around that account, like have that trust, and also just kind of want to listen up. So I think that the data is super important. KPIs are super important for some of the things that we have already talked about. But I think the anecdotal examples are just as important to really hit home. And those are the things that people really remember.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're spot on with the like marketing and sales alignment, because that's such a critical piece too. If you marketers will really struggle to find the space to invest in brand if there is if there's a culture of finger pointing from the sales team, which I think it like world in general seems to be better than it used to be, but I still see it pop up all the time where there's a misalignment across sales and marketing teams, and then nobody's going to do a good job.
Yeah. And I think it's a classic of, it's an operational thing across any department leader is bringing people along with you.
Mm.
And anything that you're doing cross-functionally, it's like, okay, how do I get buy-in? How do I get everybody on board with like what I'm trying to do, the goals I'm trying to achieve, have that accountability, and then kind of like move everybody in that direction. And it's really hard to do that. And there's not, some people I've seen people are just like naturally good at it. This is something that I've like continually work on in my career, is this kind of cross-functional alignment, bringing people along with me, having that accountability. So they're constantly being like, okay, again, building that trust. Because when you have that, everything is so much easier. Just the way your buyers, if they trust you and you have that brand awareness with them, it's so much easier. It's the same thing internally too. So I think when you're thinking about measuring the impact of your brand awareness, and bringing people along in that journey with you and making sure they're bought in, because you have to remember brand is just as much as this kind of marketing function as it is your entire employee base. You see a lot of companies out there today that are like, you can tell people that are really bought into the brand, they represent the brand. And that's really, again, really hard to do. But the more you can do that, the more extensions that you actually have of your brand. And it's not just a marketing thing, right? It becomes a company wide thing.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think that like building trust internally, I mean, huge. I can remember earlier on in my career, trying to figure out how to navigate a situation and Googling how to, ensure sales and marketing alignment. And an article I read, which I will never forget, I carried it with my whole career. It said, if you're a marketer, a marketing leader, the most important thing that you need to know about your sales leader, your sales counterpart, is how they take their coffee.
Oh,
It's
I love
like, it's not about the business, it's about having a relationship with the people that you're collaborating with. You don't have to be best buddies, it doesn't always work that way, but, like, knowing, taking the time to, like, really build a relationship and that trust internally is going to make the work that you're doing that much more impactful.
Yep, no, I totally agree with you. I love how they take their coffee because it really is. It's all, and at the end of the day too, like you're selling your ideas internally just as much as you're selling to any of like your target audience. And so we have to remember, even though we're in B2B, we're also people, and it kind of goes back to my first point around like it's all about kind of that emotional connection, regardless if it's internal or external or how you do that. But if you're really good with that emotional piece, you can get a lot done and be really successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise on this. We're going to get our hands on that B2B buying disconnect report for everybody listening out there. And yeah, thank you so much, Allyson.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. This was really fun, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for tuning in today. I'll be back